رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today I wanted to do a little bit of a review on some things that a lot of us Muslims from the West, we historically we aren't aware of, and that we, in my opinion, need to be aware of. So this is going to be pretty interactive today because I'm going to have you look things up and to prompt a discussion. And we tend to know things about the seerah in terms of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. It's after the death of the Prophet and things occurred that the ignorance, we use that word very benign, takes place, because unfortunately in our society, reading as such has become something of a forgotten art, for lack of a better expression. And we don't take the time to take a look at it, but then we hear things, we see things happening in other parts of the world concerning Muslims and Islam, and we don't have the historical perspective from a historical background and looking at things and understanding, you know, what they are and what they come from and how they came about. And so you get some of the things right now. So for example, if I were to ask the question as an example, one, what was the Ottoman Empire? When did it start? Okay, and someone can look that up now as, you know, as such, to take a look at it. And when did it end? You know, becomes another question. And what was the importance of it ending? What were the repercussions that came out of it in terms of it ending? You know, and so we want to take a look at these names that we hear tossed about if we're watching the news. And because our view about Islam can't be parochial as such, meaning just limited to what happens here within the context of the US. It has to be broader than that in light of that, for us to understand and look at what's going on, and then understand and looking at some of the ayats of the Quran and getting a real-time explanation as such of things that we see, you know, in light of that. So to begin, everyone has they're on their computers or their phones, the ability to be able to Google and look up things. I hear silence, but okay.
$12.99 for the start of the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, $12.99. Imam Radi.
Yes.
Who was the, if we use this word, progenitor, who was the person behind? What was the impetus that became the Ottoman Empire?
I want to say Ataturk, but I think I'm wrong with that one. I'm going to
anyone else that's looking at it too can go ahead and look at it as well, you know, because not obviously, Ottoman Empire undoubtedly is a English translation or transliteration or mispronunciation of what it was known, what it was known as, you know, during its time, from its inception and coming forward. While someone looks at that, when did it end? When is the end? So we have $12.99. Okay, you know, end of the 13th century going into the 14th century. So when does it end?
1450, it ended.
You sure about that?
Well, that's according to Siri.
Okay, Siri just gave you some wrong information. Okay. Anyone else? and then we'll look at the consequences of that happening and how it came, and how it came about as an example. Anyone else want to venture a guess on that? I'm not hearing anything. Okay, actually, the end of the Ottoman Empire comes with the victory of the Allies in World War I. So we're looking at 1917. So the Ottoman Empire, in a shape or form from its height and when everyone in Europe was afraid of the Ottoman Empire, ends in 1917. Okay, and so we have to take a look at how it came about and the repercussions that come out of it, because the repercussions that come out of it, if we're looking beyond our own shores at the condition of Muslims, the repercussions come from the disillusionment and the breaking up of the Ottoman Empire in 1917 at the close of World War I. Okay, and so we need to look and see at how these things were connected, because certain things are taking place now, and people say, well, how did that come about? How did the Palestinians get into the position that they're in Palestine? How did Israel come out of that circumstance, beyond that it's created by UN decree in 1948? Well, what sets the basis of even for that being able to take place in light of the circumstances that are there? Okay, so that's one of the things that we'll look at. Sheikh Mukhtar, are you there?
Yes, Imam Sheikh, I'm here.
Okay. I want you to look up this Pope, Urban II.
Urban II?
Urban II.
Okay. Imam Sheikh, I don't have any. I don't have anything to look it up with. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Anyone else who does, look up Pope Urban II.
Urban II.
Urban II was the head of the Catholic Church and ruler of the Papal States from 12 March 1088 to his death. He
Okay.
is best known for initiating the Crusades.
Ah,
But I'd like to make a statement about the Ottoman Empire with regard to the Ottomans.
okay.
Actually, the empire did fall at the earlier date that I gave you. What happened in 1917 was the dissolution of it, the breaking up of it.
Well, in 1450, what you're looking at, okay,
Mm-hmm.
The empire as such, in terms of its integrity, still existed.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know who is saying that it broke up in 1450. Okay, because going into the 16th century, there's still the Ottoman Empire. Okay, by that time, it's falling prey to expansion ideas out of Russia and out of Western Europe as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the sultans, the transition of power from sultan to sultan, and the aspect of the empire, is still it exists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as such, it has territorial boundaries. It has places where it is still, whether it's nominally or in actuality, looked at as being in control. And we know this because when you look at the 1850s, and you have the Crimean War. Why is it that the Crimean War comes about? It comes about because Russia decides to move westward into the Crimea, which is controlled by the Ottoman Empire. The European concert has decided, even though, Turkey has lost what it was called, the Ottoman Empire has lost any number of fights with Russia and lost territory. The idea is that the European concert, which Britain is a part of, Germany, which comes into effect in 1871, but the Crimean Wars, even before there's a nation state of Germany, have decided that, you know what, we want to keep the Ottoman Empire intact, because if it breaks up, there's going to be too much warfare between the countries in Europe to take pieces of it. So they want to see it be kept in its integrity as such. So in 1453, we know that the Ottoman Empire is still a force to be reckoned with, because, or later on down the line, because they take Constantinople. Okay, and this is done under the reign of Mehmet, or who is called Mehmet the Conqueror, who is succeeded by Suleiman the Magnificent. And under the rule of Suleiman the Magnificent, it is said that the Ottomans reached their zenith of power and influence, and then there's a decline that comes after that. But in the Crimean War, the Ottomans enlist the aid of Britain and France to come in along with them to forestall the Russians from controlling the Crimea. But in 1917, the political integrity and boundary integrities of the Ottoman Empire are changed. I mean, substantially. And it's because the Sultan at the time, and we can look in Google who was Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at the time, he accepts an offer from Germany. Germany becomes a nation state in 1871, shortly after defeating France, who was considered to be the most powerful nation state on the continent of Europe in the Franco-Prussian War. And Prussia becomes the linchpin under Otto von Bismarck to put together what becomes Germany. Prussia uses its might, is one of the two largest states, its military might under Otto von Bismarck, called the Iron Duke, to formulate this nation state called Germany. And they have a ruling family, very hard name to pronounce, the Hohenzollerns. And Kaiser Wilhelm I is the ruler. Well, when war breaks out, and we can cover pretty much easily how war comes about, Germany approaches, the Sultan in Istanbul and makes an offer, and basically says, if you side with us in the war and we are victorious, we will return, see that all the territory that you have lost to England, France, Russia, who form what is called the Triple Entente, that, we will make sure that your authority is reinstituted in those areas where you have lost sovereignty. And the Sultan agrees. And the idea is that in Eastern Europe, right before the outbreak of World War I, you have what is called the First Balkan War. And in this particular war, the states of what become the nation states of Romania, Yugoslavia, which is comprised of Bosnia and Serbia and some others in Montenegro, and Hungary, they fight against, it's a rebellion against Ottoman control, and they get their independence. And so he looks at this offer and he accepts it and takes it. Well, as the war begins, it does seem like what become known as the Central Powers are going to be victorious, meaning Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottomans, and that they're going to win. Ultimately, they lose, and so now the Sultan, they were on the losing side. And this is where things become extremely interesting, because World War I in and of itself is a horrendous war. No one has seen. The American Civil War gave an idea about what can happen when industry is applied to the waging of war in terms of production of weapons, arms, so forth and so on. Okay, and certain things in the American Civil War have it be known as the first truly modern war. The rapid, the ability to move troops from one place to another using railroads, the telegraph, there were for example, in earlier times in American history, you heard about what was called the Kentucky long rifle, and was called that because of the rifling in the barrel, but this took a lot of time to do. It couldn't be mass produced, but by the time the Civil War comes about, they're called rifled muskets that increase the kill range of the average, soldier carrying a rifle are easily done. And the effect of this on the battlefield is horrendous in terms of actual casualties. Okay, so forerunners of modern weaponry become known, but then in World War I, now industry is fully applied to the waging of war, and in terms of production of different things. World War I is the war in which the machine gun, as we understand it in modern terms, comes into existence and is used by both sides, but none more effectively than the Germans. And the machine gun becomes known as the queen of the battlefield. Looking at all the casualties on both sides, both from the Central Powers and the Allies, more soldiers got killed by machine guns than any other weapon. But then you have the advent of poison gas. You have the advent of the submarine, the undersea boats, and the Germans use it to some great effectiveness to stop, war supplies from America getting to England. It's the sinking of the Lusitania by a German submarine that is not an American ship, but it has about 1,200 Americans on it. And the Germans say the ship was carrying contraband to England. The Americans say it wasn't. The ship is sunk. And America enters the war, uses that as a reason, the Wilson administration, to enter into the war. So the casualties, especially on the Western Front, once the German advance on Paris is stopped at the First Battle of the Marne, a war of attrition sets in with what it called trench warfare. And sometimes during a battle, trenches can change hands 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different times. Offenses last longer than they've ever had before in any other war, with the example of Verdun. Verdun is a major battle in World War I, but the length of the battle is over 6 months. The Battle of the Somme is another one. So when we look at casualty-wise, Germany lost some 1.3 million men killed or wounded. England was around 1.1 million. France was about 1.5, million men lost. So the carnage that was produced in World War I, it gave it the title of the war to end all wars, even though 1917 World War I ends and World War II breaks out in 1939. Okay, so but the peace treaty, the peace talks takes place at the Palace of Versailles, or Versailles, France. And even though America has fought in the war from 1917, America cannot officially be involved in the peace negotiations and what's coming out because the Senate, Republican-controlled Senate, didn't ratify the treaty itself. So when Wilson and his delegation goes, they can only observe, offer comments, but can't really be involved nut and bolt-wise in the negotiations that's going on. And the attitude about the victors is pretty much to the victors go the spoils. And they want the Central Powers, which were Germany You know, Italy had started out on the side of Germany, but in the course about the middle of the war, they switched sides and side with the Allies. So they're not affected that way by the Treaty of Versailles as such. But the Ottoman Empire, in terms of us as Muslims, we need to pay attention to what happens to it and its disillusionment. You have a circumstance where now the European concert is no longer there. The members who had been part of what was called the European concert had actually fought each other. And the start of World War I comes with, in Serbia, you have a yes, you have a ultra nationalistic organization called. Yeah, I know that. Well, brother, only one that has the ability to look up stuff is Imam Radi right now. Brother Sheikh Mukhtar said he didn't have the ability to do so. And I don't see anyone else here. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's 3 people. Okay. So, but since you asked, look up Black Hand Organization. Look up the Black Hand Organization. Black Hand? Right, Black Hand. We're giving Talia a chance to look up the organization that I just mentioned, Black Hand Organization.
In Serbia?
Yep.
The secret military society formed in 1901.
Right.
By the officers in the army of the Kingdom of Serbia.
Right. What else does it say about it?
Violent and trained guerrillas and saboteurs
Mm-hmm.
and arranged political murder.
Right. What was she said, looking at the Black Hand, it was a secret military organization, Army of Serbia. Serbia wanted independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Black Hand Organization was about using any means necessary to be able to do that. Okay. So can you look up and see who was, excuse me just a minute. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, I'm in the class that I do on too. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Inshallah. I got it. Should be. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Alhamdulillah. He's in the class. Yeah. Wa alaikum salam. If you can see who was their most their most famous assassination.
Oh,
the Archduke. The Archduke.
Archduke Franz.
Archduke.
Right, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Thank you. Okay.
He was the heir apparent of Austria.
Right, exactly.
Sarajevo.
Right, in Sarajevo. So you were right in the money. Right. Okay. And as Talia found too, their most famous assassination was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, who was the crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this act in and of itself brings about the start of basically World War I. Austria-Hungary is allied with Germany. Germany advises Austria-Hungary to take a very hard stance, stating that they want the people who perpetrated the act. Gabriel Princeps is one of the individuals who was involved in the assassination of the Archduke and his wife. Serbia has an ally itself, Russia. And so Russia is telling Serbia not to acquiesce to Austria's demands. Austria is saying, if you don't, we're going to declare war. And Germany is saying to Austria, don't worry about it. If you declare war, we're going to back you up 100%. England is allied with Russia, and France is allied with Russia, and they say, until Serbia, don't worry. If that happens, we will come to your aid. And so Austria-Hungary does declare war on Serbia, along with Germany, and World War I is there. And so from 1914 to 1917, you have, one of the most bloody conflicts that has ever taken place, okay? So, but interactively, let's look at the disillusionment, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Talia, give me one present-day country that we look at now that was part of the Ottoman Empire. It didn't exist before the end of World War I. Just one.
Saudi Arabia.
Lebanon. Okay, she said Lebanon. She's right. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Another one.
Syria.
Syria. Okay. As we understand Syria today, that's two. You said Saudi Arabia, but we want to include that, and there's a reason why.
All right. Egypt.
No.
No.
There's one other one. Actually, two.
Iraq. Not Iraq.
Iraq is one, right? And there's one other one.
What did he say? Iraq?
He said Iraq. No, not Iran. Nope. Persia and Iran are separate. They didn't really get involved in World War I. Okay, but out of this, there's one other country that comes out of what was part and parcel of territory that the Ottomans controlled.
Not Palestine. No.
No, not Palestine.
No.
But you're close. You're close. That's 1948. Okay. All right. There's one other one. Everybody's so close, your fingertips are burning.
Jerusalem.
Yeah. Yes and no. J.
Oh, Jordan.
Jordan, right. Okay. And it's not called, and at the time it's called Transjordan.
Right.
Okay, Transjordan. So out of this territory, Imam Radi, the reason we don't include Saudi Arabia is because they were independent in and of themselves, and recognized as such. There are two families battling for control of what will become Saudi Arabia, and that's the House of Saud and the House of the Rashidis. Okay, but they had long since broken away from the Ottomans. But Saudi Arabia won't exist until 1938, like 1936, 38, after its own civil war between basically the House of Saud and the House of the Rashidis. In that, so they're sort of autonomous in terms of that. But the Ottomans had control of Mecca and Medina, but during the time of we know of what is called Lawrence of Arabia, and he gets the tribes there, especially Sharif Hussein of Mecca and that family, and the Rashidis to fight against the fight against the Turks. But they don't look at what happens there is not really so much important as these four, in one sense, as these four other countries that come about. And when we look at them, the first thing you notice is that no attention is paid to what people are going to be joining where. and under what rules. So Iraq doesn't exist at this point in time as a nation state. You know, what is Iraq is a province at best, okay? Syria, you know, is a sovereign state, but now Syria is created and boundary set of what present day Syria is now. Transjordan, which becomes Jordan, is what at one time was East Palestine. And then you have Palestine in and of itself. Okay, so what's so important about this? What's so important about this is that these territories are arbitrarily mandated to the nations that are given control of them. So someone tell me who gets control of Iraq and Palestine?
England.
Not England. Okay.
England.
And who has control of Transjordan? Even though they will have a king, so forth and so on, but who is mandated control of Transjordan?
Not France. Not France. Not France. I think England was England too.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. England has control of quote unquote Palestine. And out of that, they put East Palestine into becoming what is known as Transjordan. France is given control of Syria, okay? And England has control of Iraq. And the boundaries of what becomes Turkey, as we know, was set as it is today, by and large. So arbitrarily, these European nation states take control of these areas from the Ottoman Empire. And they go about establishing political control, okay? And Transjordan becomes, over time, will become Jordan, but it's controlled by England. And then you have Palestine. Okay, then you have Palestine, okay? So, Imam Radi. Is he there? Imam Radi, you still there? I see 3 people.
And man, say, what about the Balfour Declaration for Palestine, England?
We're coming to that. Is Imam Radi still available? Okay.
I forgot to unmute.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. For any one of you there, tell me, look up the beginning date, the date of its inception of the World Zionist Organization, and who was its leader during World War I and after. Thank you. It's okay.
Yeah, I tried to log on, but
That-
Okay.
All right, according to Wikipedia,
Okay.
the organization was from 1897
Mm-hmm.
to 1960.
Okay.
At the initiation of Theodor Herzl
Mm-hmm.
at the first Zionist Congress,
Right.
took place in August of 1897 in Basel, Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do they list who was its head during and after World War One. This is extremely important if we can pin down who this person was.
Siri. Who
It
was
wasn't Golda Meir, was it?
No, no. She's a young Zionist at the time.
No, Leah. No, Leah.
Now, who are we after again, Bro Sheikh? I'm sorry.
We're looking for who was the head of the World Zionist Organization during and immediately after World War One.
Is that person still alive?
Oh no, he's been dead for a while. He's been gone for a minute.
No, he just like hold on to all.
Mhm.
Yeah, you just say World War One.
Right. Come up with anything?
And it wasn't Herzl, right?
No. I'll give you a hint that may help. The person who was head of the World Zionist Organization, he was at this particular time and after the war going forward, he was a British citizen. His parents were from Russia, had immigrated to England.
Was it Rothschilds?
No, He was a chemist.
A chemist?
A chemist.
Hmm.
I don't know too much about white people.
He was a chemist. He was knighted. During World War One because of certain things that he did that aided the British during World War One.
Just give us the answer.
His last name was Weissman.
Oh yeah, Cham Azrael.
Right.
It didn't mention that. It mentioned that he was Russian.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Russian-born citizen, Russian-born biochemist, rather.
Yes.
Was he the Nazi on it?
No.
Wasn't there a Nazi on it?
Yes, indeed, it sure was. And we're going to learn about him too. Okay.
He was elected in 69.
Uh-huh.
I mean 49.
Okay.
And he served until his death in 1952.
Right.
And his name was, I guess it's Chaim Weizmann.
Right. Chaim Weizmann, right.
He was the first president of Israel.
Yep. And head of the World Zionist Organization.
Right.
Okay. Now, he's important because you mentioned that he was a biochemist. Okay. And he worked in the defense industry, in England's defense industry. He produced a type of gunpowder. Actually, they called it cordite, C-O-R-D-I-T-E.
They look just like normal human beings.
What? He was a what?
They look like normal human beings.
Okay.
Evil.
Really?
So the explosive, or that, not an explosive, the gunpowder, for lack of a better term, that he, like the official name of it was called cordite. That's a general term for, let's say, propellants that are used in artillery shells. Well, what he produced greatly increased the range on all artillery pieces that England was using during World War One, and a couple of other things he did. So he was knighted after the end of World War One. He became Sir Chaim Weizmann. Okay. But he's also head of the World Zionist Organization. And so the importance of Theodore Herzl, there were others besides him, but Herzl gets the primary credit, was this conceptualization that Jews needed to come together. And these were what they call Ashkenazi Jews, meaning European Jews. That the one thing that the Jews needed to do was to have a homeland of their own because of the type of atrocities committed against them in Europe, in Eastern Europe, what they call pogroms, Pogroms that took place, mistreatment even in Western Europe. If we look back at the Crusades, a lot of Jews were killed by Crusaders as they were on their way to the quote unquote Holy Land to fight, because the Jews were looked at as being the killers of Christ as such. So Herzl and others like him was the idea of they bring into existence what is the middle name of the World Zionist Organization, but then it's not Zionist, but Zionism. And Zionism is about the establishment of a homeland for Jews of their own, okay? And it will come to the point that they look at achieving this by any means necessary. It's not that at the inception, but over time, this is what it becomes by any means necessary. But the question here is, as I put to you, England gets mandated Palestine. What is it that you think Chaim Weizmann asked when he was asked, after he was knighted, he has a conversation with the British Foreign Secretary, and he was asked, Weizmann was asked, what more can a grateful country give to you for the service that you have rendered to the British Crown? What do you think he asked for in light of what his position was?
Military support.
He's president of the World Zionist Organization. Their platform is the creation of a Jewish state. So what do you think when this question is put to him, what do you think the response was that he gave to the British Foreign Secretary?
Palestine.
What about Palestine?
He wanted it as a homeland, I would guess.
He wanted it as a homeland, but in specifics, he wanted the British to allow immigration of Jews, of European Jews, into Palestine. Okay, now, that's going to be a problem. The problem is because there are some British diplomats, Winston Churchill being one of them, that don't want to see this happen. Because they see over time, that's going to be a problem in terms of a Jewish state declaring and wanting its independence from England and not wishing to be mandated anymore. And at this time, nobody's thinking about, well, what are the indigenous people? Sephardic Jews, Jews born and raised in the Middle East, and Muslims going to say about the fact of Palestine being opened up to the immigration of European Jews into Palestine. Okay?
Okay, sir.
So they aren't given carte blanche ability to immigrate into Palestine, but small numbers are given the ability to move into Palestine. Imam Radi,
Yes.
look up the inception of what is called the Jewish Agency. Jewish Agency. Sheikh Mukhtar, you there?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
What were we looking for with them?
Jewish Agency. What did you find?
They are the largest Jewish non-profit organization in the world.
Okay.
It was established in 1929
Mm-hmm.
as the operative branch of the Zionist organization.
Right.
Its mission is to ensure that every Jewish person feels an unbreakable bond to one another and to Israel, no matter where they live in the world, so that they can continue to play their critical role in our ongoing Jewish story.
Okay.
Phew.
Right.
Heavy, man. I wish we could get us like that.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe we could
Exactly.
recuperate.
Right?
Right. Exactly.
Good
Exactly.
Lord.
Okay. Now, what in light of what you just read, then you also you begin to find out that the Jewish Agency establishes office inside of Palestine itself. Okay. And they become the conduit for the purchasing of territory that are controlled by Muslims. They're absentee landlords that are willing to sell the land to the Jewish Agency representing the World Zionist Organization. Okay? So if you look into the Jewish Agency and its presence in Palestine, you hear some familiar names. Sheikh Mukhtar, you had asked about Golda Meir.
Mm-hmm.
Golda Meir is a young Zionist, thoroughly committed, who's part of the Jewish Agency in Palestine. David Ben-Gurion,
Mm-hmm.
okay, who becomes Israel's, when it's formed as a state, its first president. Okay? And so they begin to go about amassing territory. Now, the territory that they're being sold has people living on it. Who do you think is living on the territory?
Arabs.
Yeah, Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And the thing here is, historically, there was no problem between Sephardic Jews, Sephardic Jews, those born and raised in Palestine or in the Middle East, and the Palestinians. They got along perfectly fine. And Sephardic Jews didn't, in more cases than not, had no idea about this thing called Zionism. And when this trickle of European Jews began to filter into Palestine, people have questions. What kind of Jews are these? Who are they? Because they're bringing alien ideologies and not really talking about practicing Judaism as such. Their religion and political ideology is Zionism. They will use the aspects of the religion when it suits their purposes. Okay, this is a real important point to understand. Okay, and so you have some extreme, ultra extreme Zionists that come into Palestine. And we're going to talk about some of them because the outgrowth of what we see happening now to Palestinians on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip comes out of this circumstance. Okay, so England opens up, allowing supposedly limited immigration of Jews into Palestine, and Arab absentee landlords in many instances are selling land to the Jewish Agency. So, for example, to show you what I'm talking about, even though now they moved the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, prior to the end of World War I and the establishment of the Jewish Agency and in the efforts of the World Zionist Organization, Tel Aviv didn't exist. Tel Aviv was built on land by and much bought by the Jewish Agency from Arab landowners, whether Christian or Muslim, who owned it. The same way with the port of Haifa and the other city of Jaffa. They didn't exist. The port did, but the city that grew up around Haifa didn't. These cities like this are built on territory that is sold to them. And the Palestinians see the writing on the wall. If this doesn't, happen, if this is a keeping to allow it to happen, and once they understand the model, there's a model that the Jewish Agency has concerning Palestine. Can someone probably guess what it is? What they would say about Palestine? The way they describe Palestine. The Jews who were coming there, the European Jews who were coming there. How did they look at Palestine? What did they say about it? Right, you're right. Celia said they would describe it as their promised land, their utopia. She's absolutely right. But there's a phrase that is said that encompasses exactly what she just said. The way that they would talk about it. We've even heard it sometimes here in America in reference when they talked about Palestine, but historically at this time, when they're purchasing land and with the idea of establishing this Jewish state, which is going to be called Israel, no ifs and buts about it. In reference to the land itself, no matter who's on it, they have a phrase. It's almost like, with the Crusaders, during the time of the Crusades, what was their war cry? What was their war cry that they would say? If you watch the movie The Kingdom of Heaven, you saw the Crusaders, especially the Knights Templar, yell this phrase, this war cry constantly in reference to what they were about doing. And Pope Urban II said it as well when he sends the Crusaders on their way during the First Crusade. I'll give you some help. God blanks it.
God commands it.
Take out the word, and there's another word other than command that you could use.
Orders it.
Decree.
Close. What's another word for decree that could be used? Starts with the W.
Will.
Yes.
God wills it.
God wills it.
Mhm.
Okay. So, in principle, what the Jews say is that in coming, the European Jews coming, people for a land that is a land without people. So right off the bat, they have marginalized the Palestinians living there, right off the bat. And for Hasidic Orthodox Jews, it's like they fall under this heading of Goyim. Sheikh Mukhtar, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Give me a definition for Goyim.
Goyim is like a non-Jewish person.
In terms of the Old Testament, what does it mean to be Goyim?
It's like in Islam, like a unbeliever, kafir.
Which means, as such, what can be done to them?
Anything.
Anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and this is the basis that statement comes from. Okay, not to keep you all too longer. In the 15th century, not only were the Jews kicked out of, after the reconquest in Spain, they're also kicked out of France. And in France, they're kicked out once the French king at the time has the Old Testament, not the Old Testament, but the Talmud. He has the Talmud translated. And once he read it, he said, you all have to leave. Because in the Talmud is where the discussion about how Goyims can be treated took place. Okay, this book of Jewish law put together during the Babylonian captivity, but kept current amongst Jewish rabbis. So one of the things that was taught, and then and I make this last point before we go, was that if a Jew gave information about the Talmud to a non-Jew, they both should be put to death. In another phrase, it was stated that if the Goyim ever found out in particular what is said about them in the Talmud and the Torah, they would kill us outright. Okay, so out of this comes this phrase that the Jewish Agency uses openly to get people to contribute, to have money for the purchase of land in Palestine, to actually immigrating there. People for a land that is a land without people. Total marginalization of the Palestinians. In the contracts for property that was bought, they always included a phrase that when they took possession of the land, that it be devoid of anyone who was living on it. Okay? All of this comes out of that fateful decision that the Ottoman Sultan makes at the time, at the beginning of World War I. If you want to know his name, just look up Turkish Sultan at the start of World War I. He makes that decision because he thinks Germany's going to win. When they don't, and the Treaty of Versailles comes around, now is Katie bar the door. And caught in the middle of what's happening with the arbitrary dismantling of the empire and granting this part here and this part here and this is part there, becomes the marginalization and the beginning of what will be the horror to be Palestinian. Okay, coming forward, because England takes the position, as more Jews immigrate into Palestine, you have Palestinian resistance that begins to form. And things go to get really physical, okay? And England is like, doesn't matter who is causing the problem, we're not gonna have it, we're gonna come down on both of you, okay? And so for the Jews, the Jewish Agency and those there, they decide by any means necessary there's going to be a Jewish state. If this means that we have to take on England to achieve what it is that we want, so be it. And I'll stop there. Any questions?
Something could be meant safe.
Yes.
Very interesting. Very interesting indeed.
You know, so now,
I have one brief question. Can you repeat the name that the scientist that shell? Repeat that name.
His name is Chaim. You find it spelled different ways, but you'll finally find his first name spelled capital C-H-A-I-M.
C-H-I-M, okay.
C-H-A-I-M. And his last name is Weiserman.
Weiser, okay. Shukran.
No, okay. Now, one other thing to realize here is that never think that the Zionist movement was monolithic. It is monolithic in the aspect of wanting a homeland for Jews, but there's so much political intrigue that is going on within the organization that that deserves taking a look at. And for next week, and I want to spend just a little bit of time so when we hear different things, we know what we're talking about. There's a conference that takes place at the Biltmore Hotel in 1945. I need you to find out what that conference was.
Biltmore Hotel?
Yeah. What was the conference at the Biltmore Hotel?
Right, 1945.
Here's an answer from jewishvocabulary.org. The Biltmore Conference was called by the Extraordinary Zionist Conference and was held from the 6th of May to the 11th of May, 1942 in New York.
Okay. Now, the Biltmore Conference is really important because it does
Very bad.
something happens there that Che and Wiseman didn't expect. He had been, pretty much in control, but there's a dichotomy, some differences that emerged between him and David Ben-Gurion. And David Ben-Gurion is on the ground in Israel itself, and Wiseman isn't. Surrounding him are Golda Meir and other individuals who will have, as far as Israeli history is concerned, will play prominent roles. But at the Biltmore Conference in 1942, it establishes the sovereignty or the control of the Jewish movement in the US by American Jews. And this is really important on the political scene. Okay, extremely important. The American Jews by this time, they flex their economic muscle. And Wiseman, the authority that he had and the influence is really cut. And other individuals come, and David Ben-Gurion comes to the forefront. It's not by happenstance that David Ben-Gurion becomes the first Israeli president once the state of Israel comes into existence. Okay? And we also have to keep in mind, England did everything it possibly could to stop there from being a state of Israel. Everything it could. Okay, but this takes us, as we'll see, through World War II, because this is an extremely important role as well. Especially with some of the things, I'm going to say, well, how can that be with some of the things we see happening now as far as militias are concerned? Okay, we need to take a look at this and see, and how certain things come about. Jewish young men and women are the only ones in America right now that can go to Israel and serve in the Israeli military and not lose their American passport.
Wow.
Ridiculous.
Okay, I had a young man at the University of Central Florida, he was in class, and then he told me he got into some trouble, and he said, my father's sending me to Israel because, it's time for me to give my 2 years of military service in the Israeli army. Nobody else, as far as I know, unless something has recently changed, has the ability to be able to do that. Okay, because one of the conditions with that happening is that if an American citizen serves in another nation's military, whether it's against the U.S. or not, they lose their citizenship. But Jewish kids can go to Israel and serve in the military for 2 years and keep their American passport.
Oh my. Discrimination.
Okay, they can, that's on the, that's there, and it's been there for a long time, almost from the beginning of the inception of the state of Israel. Okay, in that, so we'll have some things to look at next week. Okay, Sheikh Mukhtar, if you're going to be with us next week, I want you to look up. Okay, inshallah ta'ala. I want you to look up Deir Yassin.
Who?
Deir Yassin.
Mary C.
Deir Yassin. D-E, some say D-I-R.
Is that pronounced that way?
Uh-huh.
I thought it was Dar Yassin.
No, Deir Yassin.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Deir Yassin.
Yeah. Want you to find out Imam Radi. I want you to find out what was the Haganah.
Haganah.
Haganah. Haganah.
Okay, wait, let me get your piece of paper.
It's interesting. Very good, I'll tell you.
Here. Take this one.
Can you spell that again, brother?
Capital Haganah. Haganah.
H-A-A-N-A-H.
Ganah. Right.
All right, sure.
Along with that, Imam Radi, I want you to look up Paul Mark, capital P-A-L, capital M-A-R-C-H.
Okay.
Okay, Sheikh Mukhtar.
Oh, no.
He's still there. Sheikh Mukhtar, are you still there? Thought he was. Sheikh Mukhtar? Yeah, I can call him and give him the one that I want him to look up.
So it's just 20.
Imam Radi, I don't want to put too much weight on you, but I want you to look up this one. Irgun, capital I-R-G-U-N.
Oh!
Okay.
And one other one, the Stern Gang.
Is it
Stern, we spell S-T-E-R-N, the Stern Gang.
They were in Chicago. They're the first Jewish gangsters in America.
Mashallah. And I'll say the other one. There's another person that is important, but in looking at Irgun and the Stern Gang, we'll be able. His name will come out as such, you know. So, but you know, I thank everybody who was here for being here. I hope you found it interesting, because
I did.
These are the things we have to. Some of the things that we as Muslims here we don't look at. We become very parochial in our outlook about what's happening with Islam, but it becomes important to have a historical perspective and know these things that took place, you know, and the effects that they have. You know, at this point, you know, now, you know, we will see. I'll tell you what we see. England does, like I said, everything possible to hold on to Palestine and Iraq, but especially Palestine. Okay, and when they decide to give up and let it go, okay, then it opens the door for so many things that takes place. Okay, for so many things that takes place. And to put it bluntly, the Muslims, historically they say Arabs, but for our purposes and looking at what we're going to see, the Muslims aren't prepared by any stretch of the imagination and things. And so names that we become associated with, we'll find out that historically their families, especially on the Palestinian side, that, I mean, it's not by circumstance or coincidence in human terms that Yasser Arafat becomes head of what will become known as the Palestine Liberation Organization. Okay, and I'll talk about the reason why, you know, his being put in that position wasn't a surprise in terms of his family connections and who he was descended from. You know, and so a lot of the confusion that we see now becomes evident from the very inception of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And suffice it to say, the individuals in the Palestine Liberation Organization, all of them aren't Muslim. They're not, you know, everybody in there that has significant position of authority aren't Muslim. Okay, aren't Muslim. You have socialists, you have communists, you know, and that, you know, in some instances you could say that within the leadership, the Muslims are in a minority in terms of individuals who have a tremendous amount of say and sway within what becomes the Palestine Liberation Organization. So, again, any other questions before we sign off for the day? I really appreciate being able to spend the time with you. Alhamdulillah. In light of that, and don't worry, we'll get back. You know, this is going to take us into looking at Islam spread into Africa, because there's some important figures there as well that we need to take a look at when we begin to look at this. And you know, a question is what happens, not that we don't know, when Muslims seemingly turn their backs to a certain extent in terms of leadership on Islam and look at other doctrines or ideology to achieve the ending of oppression, whatever the circumstance may be. What are the lessons that we learn from engaging and looking at this circumstance? And hopefully, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His mercy and His grace, so long as He is, will allow us all to be alive and well next week. So it'll be same place, same time, same channel, inshallah ta'ala.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.